When I was a child, I once heard a fairy tale about Tibet. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, the Tibetan people lived in a hell on earth as slaves. They had no food and no clothes. And then Chairman Mao Zedong led his mighty army, went to Tibet, and liberated the Tibetan people. From then on, the Tibetan people have been living in a paradise on earth, so they keep on coming to Beijing to express their gratitude to Chairman Mao Zedong and his communist government. When I came to Europe, I heard a different fairy tale. Actually, it's not that different. All the elements of the story remained the same, just the sequence changed slightly. So the story goes like this. Once upon a time, the Tibetan people lived in a paradise on earth as a free and a spiritual people. And then came the evil Chinese, who took away their land, took away their freedom, took away their religion, took away their everything. From then on, the Tibetan people have been living in a hell on earth, so they keep on coming to Europe, asking for help from the international community, and every good person with a good morale is obliged to help them. I mean, these two stories cannot be true simultaneously, right? And what makes this apparent contradiction more interesting is actually my childhood memory. When I was 7 years old, my cousin graduated from the medical school in Qingdao on the east coast of China. She received a letter from the government. She opened the letter. It reads, "Congratulations, you have been selected by the party and the government to go to Tibet. It must be a great honor to help the Tibetan people over there. Long lives Chairman Mao." My cousin collapsed immediately on the ground. We actually had to take her to the hospital for emergency care. So later on, our family had to send gifts to appropriate people so that she would avoid going to Tibet. In my hometown, it's an open secret. Every year, many government officials were fired because they refused to go to Tibet. So for me, this is really puzzling that people would create fairy tales to demonize one another for a place which seems to me nobody wants to go. So actually, this apparent contradiction puzzled me for a long time. I did not really have a clue what was the reason until recently the situation in the Middle East gave me a hint. So as you know, most people are not interested in the deserts or would want to go there unless there is some kind of a black liquid beneath it. Oh, by the way, we have heard plenty of fairy tales about these oil-rich deserts recently. So what might be the vital resource in Tibet that draws analogy to the oil in the Middle East? It's not that difficult to find out if you look for the information. You can see that half of the world's total population live in that very small circle. And if you look at this area in more details, you will see almost all the rivers in that area originated from Tibet. So combining these two pictures together, you will reach a logical conclusion, which is also supported by many scientific studies. That is, half of world total population live in the watershed of Tibet. So this is what makes Tibet so desirable. And China is certainly not the only country that is interested in Tibet. When China was weak in the 19th century, both the British Empire and Russia actively engaged in acquiring interest in Tibet. In 1904, the British Army did invade Tibet. And in 1907, the conflict of interest between Russia and the British Empire had become so intense, the two parties had to sit down and negotiate a treaty over Tibet so that they would avoid clashing in the battlefield. So this is the real historical background about Tibet, but what we have heard recently has been something completely different. Okay, so by focusing all our attention on human rights in Tibet, so what's the outcome? In the end, what did we get? So it's very obvious to me, half of a century China bashing over human rights in Tibet produced zero progress. China, after being humiliated in public for so many years, today have become allergic to the Tibetan issue. So China did not wish to discuss Tibet, regardless what are the issues, including some of the reasonable issues China would have otherwise considered, such as some reasonable amount of autonomy for Tibet, better preservation of the culture. But today, China does not want to discuss Tibet at all. Okay. On top of that, by focusing all our attention on human rights, we have ignored a whole dimension about Tibet. So what we observe today is that in Tibet, the glacier is melting much faster, the waters, rivers being polluted by Chinese mining, and there is a diplomatic dispute between China and every single neighbor that shares water resources. This is because the global warming, the huge demand of China for the natural resources. Okay, so now having said all this, what would be the way to move forward? I think the first step to solve the real issue is to talk about the real issue, which is the purpose of my talk today. And as you probably now understand, the Tibetan issue is much more than just a right or wrong, who is the right, who is the good guy, who is the bad guy, is much more than that. Solving the Tibetan issue would require close cooperation between China, the neighboring countries, and the Western countries as well. For example, I know there is a great Hungarian company, Organic, now in China helping the Chinese to treat wastewater. Similar technologies might include better mining technology to preserve the water resources, or the technology that's going to turn seawater into drinking water. So these are the practical measures we could take to make the situations in Tibet better. Not human rights, human rights, human rights. But from another perspective, I think the Tibetan issue is a huge opportunity as well, because not only it is the most touchy issue between the rising China and the incumbent in the West, it is also one of the most important pieces in the puzzle, how we human beings could survive the 21st century with this amount of pollution we have been generating. Okay? So solving the Tibetan issue in a collaborative fashion is a very strong signal that we as mankind have become more sophisticated and we no longer believe in fairy tales. Thank you.